Hey everybody, today I'm going to be reviewing Wonder Woman 1984. This film was directed by Patty Jenkins. This is a sequel to the very successful Wonder Woman, which came out in 2017, and it is a film that I certainly had my issues with, but I did overall really enjoy it. I was surprised by how much I did like it. It was just kind of refreshing to see a movie on that type of scale really strike the right balance between kind of the playfulness, the sentimentality, as well as the humor. Treating Wonder Woman as a real character with real motivations, and she does grow, throughout the film. She has an arc, and the characters around her have a charm to them as well. My issue with the film was mainly in the third act, mainly because it doesn't really gel that well with the first two acts, or especially the first act, and the result was just kind of this muddled CGI sludge that is rarely distinctive or memorable, but overall I still felt that there was enough in the film to enjoy. But what Hollywood movies, these big Hollywood movies in this current day, don't seem to understand is that simplicity is kind of the way to go when you're trying to craft a story like this. Because the way that things are now, there's just so much going on often. Everything gets so weighted down. It kind of flattens the emotional potency rather than really giving us something to chew on. And I had hoped, with 1984 that they would improve upon a lot of the issues that they had in the first one. But that did not happen. So this film takes place in 1984. Why? I'm sure there's a perfectly good explanation that I'm not really aware of, but in truth, it's really more of a marketing decision because the 1980s is just this novelty gimmick that is perfect for millennials to romanticize. We just romanticize nostalgia, and it's very marketable just from a movie standpoint, from a pop culture standpoint. Back in the 70s and then the early 80s, you saw a lot of films that were kind of, romanticizing the 1950s, kind of those bubblegum pop type movies like Grease or even a movie like American Graffiti, which is a little bit different, but the same kind of thing. Same thing today. Now we have movies like It, and we have shows like Stranger Things. They're very bankable, the fetishizing of the material world of specific eras like this. But yeah, the simple explanation is I think we just love nostalgia in America, maybe a little bit too much. But viewing the modern climate as it exists today through the lens of the 1980s, I think can be very interesting when it's done right, from the right point of view. They do it very well in like American Psycho, as an example. That's the one that I typically like to use. But here it is a similar focus on the capitalist corruption of the time and how it relates to the modern world. Fascination with material and excess, which is of course something that the 1980s had an abundance of. And in this film we are introduced in the beginning with, girls in spandex and neon spandex jogging, big hair, malls, fat people shoving, fast food into their mouths at food courts. And yeah, I admit there is a nice charm to the nostalgic aspects of it. Yes, is it a major gimmick? Of course it is, but at least it gave it a little bit of a personality, and they were really trying to think that aspect of it through, at least aesthetically. Yes, there's a silliness to it, a cartoonishness, and even though it may feel trite, it is likable. And I always felt like a lot of the superhero movies today, they feel like they need to take themselves really seriously. But really, when you look at the concept of a lot of them, they are silly, and Wonder Woman is cartoony and silly. So I think they kind of take advantage of that in a very, cheeky way. I felt very invested in these characters, especially in the first act of the film. And I was really kind of enjoying myself. I was pleased to see that this film didn't neglect those aspects. I found it kind of interesting seeing at the beginning Kristen Wiig's character, seeing how she was going to develop. And yes, of course, bringing back the old favorites, even though we're really stretching the logic in terms of how they get here. But it's fine. I mean, like, it's dumb fun, and that, that's kind of the mood that it's going for. There is that liveliness and that energy to it that is a bit infectious. And I did complain a lot in the first film about the murkiness just of the colors. It's like a very kind of gray color palette. And yes, it's supposed to be World War I, but the grading was just a tad much, in my opinion. But here, it's just the opposite. Those colors are popping. It's color overload. I really do like Gal Gadot. I guess that's how you say her name. I'm never really sure. But, she's just a really enjoyable presence on screen, and just a wonderful Wonder Woman. She has a real elegance, of course, and an intelligence in terms of her approach to the character, and of course beauty in spades. Like, she's so beautiful, it's ridiculous. And the best thing about the last film was her, and that they focused on her character and really building it, and the focus on the love story. It was her chemistry with Chris Pine. And even in this film, though it's not the same kind of magic, I would say, they're still really, really enjoyable to watch. They are wonderful together. They're just classic movie star chemistry. They have a real ease and a comfort and a sexiness, and you want them to succeed, and when they don't, it like legitimately hurts. And I find that attention to that sort of chemistry very rare in a lot of the current superhero films that we see. This is much more reminding me of, like, you know, Superman in the late 70s and in the 80s. And quite frankly, those are some of my favorite superhero movies anyway. But yeah, I could watch her and Chris Pine just all day long. I feel like they're just great. But those are the key things that stuck out to me about this current film. Yeah, the first act is fun, and you know, it is focused, and I wish they had kept it more within that scope, more tied to those characters' personal motivations, and followed through a lot on the emotional stakes for them. You know, like the Kristen Wiig character really does develop, and then they just kind of cut it off, and it gets, you know, her payoff is really kind of dead in the water. No pun intended. And I don't mind the film kind of starting in this certain fashion and then becoming more dramatic and serious. That's fine. That can be very interesting. But once you start going for this really overarching statement about the current state of America, and you know, just the world politics in this very rudimentary fashion, it loses so much, I think, of what made it interesting. As it goes on, it gets so weighted down in exposition, and it does become, again, another very CGI muddled mess where you just don't feel the physicality of any of the fights. There's no grit or a real movement that feels tangible in the visuals. But then it starts to go into this whole other territory where it just feels like a really bad PSA advertisement, and it was like the person who was writing the script just stopped, and someone else who was completely different, had a completely different point of view on things, decided to finish it. It felt like two completely different halves of a movie put together. The villain here is played by Pedro Pascal, and he's playing Donald Trump. And I'm so insulted that the writers won't even acknowledge that. Like, no, it wasn't influenced with it. And it's like, come on, we're not stupid. I mean, the character rises to prominence in the 1980s, and he is like, what, a con artist, a failed businessman in the film who rises too quickly out of greed and the need for excess, and he ends up filling the seat of the President of the United States. So many things are annoying about this. It's, first of all, very poorly constructed, and it's just ham-fisted. They're just throwing it in your face, the cliches here. And no, not in a breezy, kind of cheeky way like it was in the first half, which is much lighter, in a really just bad way. And it just felt like the shit in the second half really had an agenda. And it's a poorly executed agenda at that. The whole moral behind the film is the idea that, you know, greed and selfishness and getting the things that you want without working for them can lead to very bad things and cost a lot for others as well as yourself. And that's fine, whatever. You know, lots of movies deal with that sort of theme, but to take it and twist it into this obvious sort of, you know, representation of what our world is going through in a way that is just so kind of misrepresenting the true complexity of how we did get here, to me, just, it feels ignorant and out of place. And it feels very condescending. And a movie like this that is, you know, a very big budget, very expensive movie with a lot of corporate tie-ins, you know, is kind of a victim to what it seems to be criticizing. It's part of the excess, but when I say it's a bad PSA, I mean, it really, really is. Like, it gets to the point in the third act where Wonder Woman literally is looking at the screen. I mean, like, breaking the fourth wall, and she starts speaking to us as the viewer, telling us to be better and make better choices, and it's like, gross. Fuck you, man. Like, this elitist sort of bullshit is precisely why I think, like, Hollywood is so out of touch in the first place. Sacrificing story and character building and just bringing it to a halt just for this one moment where you can preach to the audience is just, it's cringy. It's embarrassing. It's just a lazy way of executing your thesis. Really, really, really lazy. These movies just need to be thought through a little better, and if they were, I think it would improve things tremendously. So yeah, it was weird, and the first half and the second half just put together were unexpectedly jarring, and both films do fall victim to that third act, and they lose their focus, but in this one it felt much more glaring. What they should have done is really hone in on Diana and hone in on the things that matter to her, as well as the ensemble of people around her, and just keep it in that vicinity. It would make the film just so much better. It just makes it very hard to connect with the characters beyond a certain point. However, all of that being said, I would watch a Wonder Woman 3. I would be interested in it just because, you know, I like a lot of aspects of both films. I enjoy Diana as a character, as I've said, and I find certain elements of both movies refreshing, but just not enough. It's got to work on that second half, especially that third act. And I think it is achievable, so I'm gonna hope for it. You know, I don't get my hopes too high, but you know, I do hope for it. But yeah, as this movie stands, 1984, I can't quite recommend it, even though there are things I like about it. There's not enough to balance out the bad aspects for me. If you're a fan of Wonder Woman, certainly I would, you know, just check it out. But overall, yeah, I was a bit disappointed in this film, and the more that I think about it, the more that second half of the film really does stick out in my mind and leave kind of a bad taste in my mouth. And that is my review. Thank you guys so much for watching. Over here are my Patreon supporters. Thank you guys so much. Also, check out my website, deepfocuslens.com. It's pretty new. I am an artist. I do commissioned portraits and I sell prints of my work. So if it's something you're interested in, you can go to the shop. And if you would like to work with me and you have any questions, just shoot me an email and I can answer you back. And beyond that, all my social media is below. You can watch more videos here and you can subscribe if you'd like. Catch you next time.